Hi, today we're going to take a very quick look at trapping errors within OpenInsight, and we'll be reporting one of those options to the status line, and the other we'll be looking at some more professional code in a Commuter module. So all of that right after these few words. Hi, you're listening to Martin, and this is another video in my series in which I am looking at getting started with OpenInsight 10. Today we're going to build on the previous lesson where we looked at the status line and previous lessons to that where we looked at messages, because I want to look at error trapping. Now, within other systems that I've seen, there's a concept of a try and a catch, or catch and try, whichever way around it is. Within OpenInsight, we do set the status of the system, and you can get that and you can report that. But really within OpenInsight, there are lots and lots of different ways of presenting errors. So for instance, if you remember, for our appointment date here, if we put in a date that is incorrect or isn't consistent with our application, then we post a message that the user has to click OK. That's fine, but it can be a little bit invasive, and what we're going to look at here is setting the status and then updating the status line. So let's just come out of here for the moment. So I'm not going to save my changes. And one of the things I am going to do, because I'm getting fed up with it, is I'm going to make the edit line there to be invisible. I don't want that showing all of the time. Okay, so if we drop down to the edit table here, and the code that we're going to be working in is going to be the cell click code, because in here we've got a case statement. Now within this case statement we cater for column 4 and column 3, but what happens if our user was to click on a different column? Doesn't matter too much because we don't want our application to do anything, but really when you're doing case statements, we really ought to have a case of otherwise with a dollar on the end, so that it will do column 4, column 3, otherwise do this. And normally there would be some sort of error condition that you wanted to throw. So to be fair, in the context of this application, this doesn't really fit, but this is just an example, so just bear with me. Right, one of the things to do initially when we are setting the status is we need to declare it as a function. So I'm going to put that at the top here. So set underscore status with an open, also just set status. And then for our otherwise code, I'm going to set a variable called error, and that is going to be set underscore status open and close bracket. Then there are a number of ways that we can interact with the status line, as we know. So let's just have a look at doing that just by writing to it itself. So if we do a set property, and this is going to be to mp underscore mdi main, and the control is lbl underscore status line, and we're going to be passing in there the def prop and val error, so whatever text we've got in val error. Now to force the error, I'm actually going to come up here and I'm going to set the col to a load of 9s. So now we're not going to hit column 4 or column 3, we are actually going to hit the otherwise code. And I think what we'll do here in otherwise is we'll set a debug so that we can just see what's going on initially. So if I do a compile and a save, I'm going to save the form, but we're going to run the MDI main form because obviously we're going to be reporting to the status line in this form, so where it says ready at the bottom. So if we run our form, we'll just go on to images and we select any old column, so column 1. Then we set our column to 99999, which now means that we've hit the otherwise case statement, and we're going to set the val error. So if I do a step into, now the system error is just a 0 at the moment. There are times where you might have an FS 401 or 1019 or whatever for a networking condition. There's lots and lots of different error messages that are within OpenInsight, and if you look in the help file you'll see system error messages, FS error messages and all sorts. So from time to time this would get updated, and then if I just do a run, then we just set the 0 to the status line, which doesn't make an awful lot of sense within our application, but you get the idea. So let's just go back to our code, and I'll just slide this over again, and we'll comment out that piece of code, and this time we'll do a call send info, and in this sense we'll do an error has occurred, error code, and we'll do a space, close out the text, and then we'll concatenate val error. And I'll get rid of the debug, we don't need that for the moment because we know we're going to get a 0. We'll just do a save on these, test run, and this time if we just click on the first column we get as error has occurred, slight typo there, rather an error has occurred, error code, and then we're passing in 0 being the system's error code. Now because the 0 doesn't make an awful lot of sense, we can take this a step further. So we'll change that to an error has occurred. So error code, and then instead of the system error code, what we could put in here is MP401 incorrect column clicked, and we just need to make that complete string of text, compile it, save it. We will save that. We'll then go back into the form, test run it, and this time if we were to click on column 1, then we get an error has occurred, error code, MP401 incorrect column clicked. So I think that's several different ways of passing back errors, directly to a status line or using send info, and then different ways of building up an error message to either your own or a system error code if one makes sense. And obviously when you're writing your code, if you use a debug, then you'll be able to see whether you're getting a 0 back from OpenInsight or whether you're getting one of the system error messages returned, which makes a lot more sense to use those if necessary, but you can use your own. So this particular code that we have in here at the moment, let me just bring it back up for you. I'm going to get rid of the code 999 because we're done with the proof of concept in here, but the code that we're using down here, the send info, this is fine if we're writing a script or a stored procedure that isn't a commuter module, and we generally use set status to pass the error information back to the caller, and this is because these types of stored procedures can be called from many different places, and they generally know very little about the context that they're executed in, and for this reason they shouldn't really assume that it's okay to display a message and you'd have the caller do that. Now obviously in this piece of code here we know the context that we're running in, but if you imagine this was in a stored procedure that was saved away called store procedure Martin, and then that stored procedure was being called by lots of different scripts or lots of different programs, you wouldn't know the context. So this is a good example for that. Now if you have got a commuter module, such as the commuter module that we created earlier for this window, Carl has given me some code that he uses where within the commuter module you know the code and you know the response, that it's going to be a response to an event, and he sets a couple of variables called abort and error text, and then before the program returns it checks to see if abort is set to true, and if there's anything in error text then it will show that message. So normally you would have your declaration at the top of your program, so normally that would go up here. I've got it just here for the moment for ease. I've then set some variables, these ones that are highlighted, purely so that I can compile this particular program. Normally you would have these labels set up, so on changed, on char, on click, and then you would have code at the top for those, and then object and this other one in here. You're going to have to forgive me, I'm not a coder, so I don't really understand this code and I'm not using it within my applications for the moment. But we set some error text, we set the abort to false, and we set the return value, and then he runs through checking the methods that have been called, and then you've got your on goal subs going back and getting all the information, and then we build up the error text. If there is an error, we then set the abort to true. Otherwise we can set this error text and the abort to true, and then if abort, we'll build up the error and we'll display it as a message, and then if the message was create, then we'll simply close out the window. So this is a block of code that Cole uses. Obviously it gets manipulated as and when, but just a block of code at the end of a commuter module that he uses for managing his errors. Like I said, there's no right or wrong way in OpenInsight. You can create your own error trapping block of code, save that away as a code template. We've covered that in a previous lesson, and then you can simply drop that into your programs as you need it. So it's a very, very quick look at trapping errors within OpenInsight using your own error messages or using the set status error messages and the error codes that are sent back, and then setting those in store procedures or scripts or a block of code for a commuter module. So that's this lesson. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next lesson coming very soon. Bye bye.